Hey everybody, welcome back to Inside Gaming. If you read the title, you know we're going to be discussing the controversial game by Naughty Dog, The Last of Us Part 2, and of course the hate that surrounded the game pre- and post-launch. I'm sure there are probably a few people out there that'll hate this video before giving it a watch, but all I ask is that you at least hear us out, and then form an opinion, and then, who knows, Evan and I, we have pretty divisive opinions about the game, so you might share the same sentiment of at least one of us, so hear us out, and then make your decision as to whether or not you want to slap a nice juicy dislike on this video. Of course, this video is going to be heavily centered around spoilers, so if you wish to play the game, you haven't played it yet, or you're currently playing it, you haven't beaten it yet, I would probably advise you skip out on this video for now. And with that out of the way, I am joined today by my wonderful, gracious co-host, Evan Campbell.
Yes, that's me, Evan the Terrible, as I'm known. There's so much here in this game to talk about. I mean, everything from the marketing to the lead up with the leaks and everything, like, where do you want to start, man?
Obviously, you played it. Did you complete it? Did you beat the game?
Oh, yeah.
Through?
We were rushing to do a spoiler cast, so I had to crunch the game in about 3 or 4 days. My experience is a little bit tainted in that way, but I'll try to account for that in talking about the game's gameplay and that sort of thing. But yeah, I finished the game in about 23 hours. It's about a 20 to 30 hour game, depending on the reviewer or the player and the style that you approach it. I'm a huge Naughty Dog fan, so this game hits me in a weird way where I think you probably, and we'll get into it, come down on the more favorable side of The Last of Us 2, and I think I come down more on the I'd pump the brakes. I don't know about this one, guys.
Well, that's actually a good segue. I'm actually the one here that absolutely loved this game. I played it, I beat it. I didn't have the time restriction because I had no obligation to this game. I did pay for it. I didn't have to do a review on it. This was my purchase, so I wanted to enjoy it as much as I could. You bet your sweet ass. I took my time with this game. I explored every nook and cranny, made sure I looked at every note, read everything. So I definitely was able to get a good grasp on the overall atmosphere of this game. Obviously, the game has received a lot of criticism, some warranted, some not so much, in my opinion. First off, there were the leaks that came out before the game had actually launched, and I couldn't help but wonder if maybe those leaks hadn't had happened. Do you think the game would have suffered as much? I don't know. What do you think?
Did it suffer? I think that we even ran a story about on the Daily about how it sold just fine. People were buying it anyway.
I guess I shouldn't say suffered. I guess more so have a stigma around it. Not a lot of people. I did see some people getting death threats for speaking positively about the game because the mob mentality was so strong and passionate about hating this game. So obviously it did well financially, but there was that conversation happening about The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh, the social justice warrior garbage is infecting my games, right? So I think the wild thing to me is that a lot of the people who would probably identify as being on the side of social justice or whatever, maybe they don't even identify that way, but people you would cast or typify in that space have come out in criticism of this game because it does handle a lot of things like representation kind of poorly. Trans characters, and potentially you can't just really take Ellie, who's a gay character and or lesbian character, and just swap her with what would normally be heteronormative superhero type character like a Nathan Drake and have them kind of just swap the roles in that way. It felt like I think some of those criticisms there on that side of the fence it's weird because people who you would think are on opposite sides of the fence of liking or not liking a game both disliked The Last of Us 2, and for I guess different, it's just wild the way that came all together.
To that point, me personally, I know that there are a lot of properties and franchises that definitely do try to push a certain agenda, whether it's for the sake of tokenism or for the sake of just being inclusive. That can come off as a little bit disingenuous. Me personally, I think the way The Last of Us Part 2 did it is perfect, honestly, because they did a good job of normalizing it. It's not so much, hey, look, this is a gay character. Hey, look, this is a trans character. It's more so this is just here because this is this world that's being inhabited. It feels more realistic to me because it is obviously something that should be normalized. Just having it kind of there but not really mentioned, it's just part of daily life. I think that's where our opinions kind of differ a little bit.
I think a really good point about it too is that in terms of representation, that stuff is gonna feel like tearing off a band-aid. When you have representation, it's gonna feel out of place because it's not really been done before and it's not been done in a big AAA game like this before. So people are gonna notice. I think you're right, that it's good that we have this representation, but I think they could go better about the way that they handle these characters. One of the big criticisms of the trans character was that they were dead named in the game, and that's a taboo thing in trans culture. The reason people are frustrated with Lev's representation of the game is because while Last of Us is a violent world, Lev's violence and his experiences happened to him specifically because he's trans, not because he's in a violent world. Like his story in general is kind of awful. He basically, his entire family is killed. He has to murder his mom because she doesn't agree with him being trans, and he tries to come forward with that, and it doesn't go for well. Like, yeah, I think that's problematic.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I guess, that could have been handled a bit differently.
You know, I'm not a trans person, but if my only representation in games and media was like having a brutal existence, you'd get pretty tired of it probably pretty quick.
I guess that's true. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
We're here to jam, man. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. I mean, like, that's just a perspective, right? Like, there's a lot of other perspectives you can bring to this game.
Well, let's talk about, obviously, I guess the most apparent thing, which is the review bombing. It's weird because obviously you had a lot of critics who played the game early, gave it perfect scores. You have the general public that saw the leaks. A lot of them didn't play it, from what I've seen, which is really weird. I feel like you'd want to play a game before you form an opinion. I don't know. You know, that kind of skewed the user score, which kind of sucks because I don't think it deserved the review bombing it got. I understand that fans are upset because Joel was killed. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the review bombing?
As far as review bombing is concerned, I think it's really kind of a lousy practice. It doesn't really allow games to live and exist on their own merits, you know, regardless of how good or bad a game is. And even if I think there's a lot to be said about how people feel mistreated or lied to with the trailers of The Last of Us 2. I think with the leaks and the review bombing, the criticism I think comes from seeing the ending of the game and being like, this story doesn't amount to anything because of the way things play out.
There's the corny saying of, it's not about the destination, it's about the friends you made along the way. That's kind of true here because, I mean, granted, the ending of the game, I didn't feel satisfied, but I feel like that's what was almost intended. After I played it, I remember I just kind of sat there on my couch staring at my TV for a bit. That's when I know a game really hits the right chords for me. It's when you feel either really good or you feel really bad. And I think the game made me feel really bad, but I also had that sense of accomplishment because obviously I just beat the game, but I still felt very empty, and it made me think about it for a few days. And honestly, I think that's really hard to come by with games where they really resonate with you. Even though you did all this stuff, the ending didn't matter.
It can have that effect. I think that's the intended effect. So I think you landed like right in the sweet spot. And for me, I felt like it was a little too ham-fisted. I feel like it tried to get that message across so many times throughout the game in different ways, through pickups and collectibles, through, you know, constant mistakes that Ellie makes, and all the way through to the ending where it's like, are you empathizing with this villain character yet? And by the end, I was kind of tired because the story is really well presented, even if like that's my critique of like it being kind of ham-fisted in that way. People who hadn't played the game at all would never even understand that take, right? Like they just tried to jump to the end conclusion without experiencing kind of incredible feat that Naughty Dog accomplished in terms of like storytelling in a game. Regardless of the context and the text that's in there, the way they tell the story is just phenomenal. The presentation, the performances, everything about it.
I think another thing we should do is maybe take a look back in time to the first game. It was an excellent game. I do want to ask, do you think the story wrapped up successfully, and do you think it needed a sequel?
I think The Last of Us 2 could have existed, but I don't think we needed to touch the story of Ellie and Joel again. Or maybe if we did, not in this way. The way that it ended, I think they took some liberties with kind of the story and just saying like, this is the way things are, so that you could have Joel have this moment of like, does he save the life of this child and regain his humanity and let the rest of humanity die out? And that's a good way for something to end, I think, especially a narrative that basically takes all these old tired tropes like The Last of Us 1 did. It's like a classic zombie story. They escalate the way they tell that story in such a way that it makes it this really like supreme experience. And some of those elements were missing from The Last of Us 2. Obviously the high bar of quality is there, but the way that you go from story beat to story beat, I think, is not as strong in that way.
So here's the thing for me. A lot of people say the game is a revenge story, but I personally think it's more of a forgiveness story. I know that sounds corny as hell, and I'm sorry. As far as that tying into if the game needed a sequel, I think definitely, obviously what Joel did at the end wasn't a very good thing. I mean, I get why he did it, but obviously he could have possibly saved the world. But I do think there was more to tell in that world. But like you said, I don't think it should have been centered around Joel and Ellie. Maybe it could have been centered around Abby the whole time, and then just had bits and pieces of Joel and Ellie's story, or, you know, just like in notes or things you find. I think there could have definitely been references. I'm glad there is a sequel because obviously it's more time spent in that world, but I think it could have been done slightly differently. But at the same time, I don't know if I would want it to be done differently because I thoroughly enjoyed what I got. I don't know. I'm a bit conflicted there.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Again, I think it's a story that's kind of, even though I don't like the particular story beats, I think it's a story that's told well, if that makes any sense. That might be like extremely mind melting for some people are like contradictory. I don't care for the story very much, but I think it's just told very, very well.
I know specifically, I think a lot of people felt a strong sense of hate towards Abby. Obvious reasons, she killed Joel. The way she was introduced kind of sucks, but again, I think I see what they were going for, make you hate playing as her, but eventually you start to turn the tides a little bit. As far as if that worked for a lot of people, I don't know, it worked for me. By the end of the game, I personally did grow an attachment with Abby. I thought she was a really cool character. I might get some death threats in my inbox for saying that, but I liked Abby. I don't know what you want me to say. And I'm not saying that to pander.
Even in the game, people make fun of like the size of her arms, but when I was like choking fools out, I was like, yeah! I kind of agree with you in a way. For me, introducing Abby like that was just like a no-win situation. Like it's this crazy feat that they set up. Like, can we make you empathize with this villain, I think is the question. In this game, this Naughty Dog game particularly, I've never seen the seams in the writing in this way, and this is what's frustrating for me. It's frustrating because for me to kind of have that moment, I had to kind of block out the part where Abby just like murders Joel in cold blood in this room full of people, and the way that she does it, especially after having her life been saved. And you don't know this character well enough to even know if that's something like the character would do. Is her sense of morality and justice in that way? Like, Joel totally saved her life, and so did Tommy, right? So like, would she still have made that choice? Like, and a lot of the criticisms come from the reason you're able to empathize with Abby towards the end is because Ellie just becomes such a monster, right? Like, she's going to still fight Abby at the end of the game after she's been tortured for like 3 months or whatever. And yeah, I don't know if it all lines up for me. Like, I don't know if The Last of Us 2 sold me on the actual story beats and in the way that they happened.
So after that scene had happened, the thought that kept crossing my mind was I could just die right now and put the game down and like Abby died. I got my revenge on her. But as I kept playing and as I realized that, you know, Abby's motives and why she did what she did, it started to really click with me, and it started to make me realize what Naughty Dog was going for and what Naughty Dog wanted the player to feel, and that was that there are no good guys or bad guys on either side. Everybody's just trying to survive. I picked up what they put down. You know what I mean?
Totally. That's super fair, and I think we arrived in a similar spot, I think, but just in different ways. Like, I definitely kind of sided more with Abby by the end.
And another thing that I noticed people complaining about was these new characters that they introduced, like Jesse and Manny. There's many moments where you get to know these people, and then they die, like in really fast, you know, it's like a second they're dead. I saw some people saying like they don't mention these people ever again after they died. If they were so close, why do they just forget about them? But if you read between the writing, obviously when somebody dies, there's something actively happening that has to push the player to the next scene in order for them to, you know, not get killed. So there's definitely that no time to mourn aspect to it.
I think that there was another criticism I saw about kind of how Ellie has this breaking point after she tortures Nora, but in the game you've already just like killed hundreds of people. It's weird that there's this word ludonarrative dissonance, right? The difference between what's happening in the story and what you're doing in the game is also another like common critique of Naughty Dog games, where it's just like you're just like laying waste to hundreds of mobs and minions and stuff, but then it's like this one instance for the story's sake has the main character kind of like in their feelings.
Was the story all for nothing? I mean, when you get to the end of the game, was it all for nothing? Because a lot of people, you know, obviously say this game is like a fart in the wind. Ellie doesn't even do the thing that she set out to do. Ellie doesn't do the thing that this game has been hammering home the entirety of this game. Ellie doesn't do it. Was this game all for nothing? What do you think?
Definitely not. The way that the game ends and people feeling like they need that revenge for satisfaction. They're not paying attention to the greater text of the game, which again is like so hamstrung like that. I got tired of it personally, of just like revenge is this bad thing. You probably shouldn't go out to kill people in cold blood because one, it's very dangerous in that world and very risky to do, and you're putting other people in harm's way. They obviously had a story to tell. I mean, it's one thing to like not like it or whatever, but to not even give it a shot, I think is a little bit unfair. It does do great things, like even horror game moments that I've played in a while, or my favorites. I don't play a lot of horror games. Running on a base PS4 just like a champ, like it was awesome.
Would you consider this a bait and switch? Because I saw obviously, you know, the early marketing for this game, you know, a lot of the trailers, there were some parts where they showed like Joel, he was older, and then Ellie was older, and then you play the game and that's not the case. They're actually younger because it's, you know, present day, it's a flashback sequence.
It's kind of a bold move. I think they're playing into the narrative that goes into the marketing cycle. Like they tried to control, and it fell through the bottom for them, right, because of the leaks, but they're trailers, right? They're supposed to get you excited and curious about whatever the thing is. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's underhanded, but I get it, right? Like they're very aware of the marketing cycle and what people would be interested in. And I think people who wanted to play this entire game as Joel or half this game as Joel are rightfully kind of disappointed, right?
I do want to make the connection to Metal Gear Solid 2. With the early marketing for the game, everything was showing that you were going to play as Solid Snake.
The tanker, Washington Bridge. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when the game came out, that was only on the tanker, and the rest of the game was played as Raiden. I feel like that kind of marketing was very strong because I think it hit the players a lot harder come launch day. I think that if The Last of Us 2 would have followed suit and the leaks would have never happened, I think the game would have done a lot better, honestly. Just as far as like public reception goes, I think a lot of people would have kind of understood what they were going for, and they would have understood the element of surprise and that it wasn't to mislead, but it was more so to hit you harder when you actually went to play the game.
I think anybody would want to do that, and I think it's clever to try and use trailers to do that, but I mean, we'll see if that ever happens again because of the backlash that they had. But yeah, I think it's really good to compare it to MGS2.
I think a lot of developers won't be using these quote-unquote deceptive practices in order to sell their games moving forward. With Resident Evil 5, the promotions for that, you know, Chris in front of a tombstone that said Jill Valentine, she was dead. Go to play the game, she wasn't dead. You know, games have been doing this for a long time. Unfortunately, it fell short here, and I think the game would have hit so much harder had the leaks not come out.
From my perspective, I think it's fair game. Like, I like to be tricked and surprised in that way, but yeah.
It is what it is, man. We're not hating on people who played the game and didn't like it. You know, obviously, I mean, I'm personally a firm believer and you're entitled to your opinion. Really all we're saying is if you didn't get a chance to enjoy it, one, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you like these kinds of games. It's definitely worth a shot. But if you played it and you didn't like it, let us know why. The comment section is your playground. By all means, let us know why you didn't like it.
But also play nice. Don't be terrible in there. Don't be giving death threats to people who have a differing opinion than you. Just like, talk about it.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch us talk about a game that came out 2 weeks ago.
I think it wasn't my cup of tea per se, and I'd still say you should probably check this game out.
See, there you go. You got two opposing sides. You got two sides of that fence, that nice chain link fence. You got both sides telling you to play the game. So have a great rest of your Sunday.
See ya.
Bye.
It's no secret that The Last of Us 2 has seen more than its share of controversy, but now we've got our first data on how all of that online ruckus affected the bottom line.
Yeah, ever since spoilers to the game leaked earlier this year, there's been a pretty big online backlash with some people accusing Naughty Dog of taking the franchise in a direction they did not want it to go. Oh no.